Hello, everyone, and welcome to October's Veeam 100 show. My name is Sophia Mohammed, and I'm a community analyst here at Veeam, and I'm joining you live from the Veeam office here in Columbus, Ohio. I'm joined by Corinne Bassett. New title for Corinne, Global Technologist, Microsoft 365 lead here at Veeam, and Veeam Vanguard, Brad Jervis, who serves as a product architect at ThinkOn. Corinne is also joining us from home in Ohio, and Brad is joining us from Hungary today, I believe. Brad, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Be sure to let us know in the comments where you're joining us from. We already heard that there's viewers in Washington State and Angola, which is really nice. And in the spirit of the season, what is your favorite activity to do in autumn? I just decided to ask that. So let us know, engage in the comments there. How are you both doing today?
Fantastic. And actually, if we're talking about the favorite things to do in autumn, every year I love to get hot apple cider somewhere. We have really good apples here in Ohio, and it becomes an entire season where you get local apple cider from like every local vendor and local shops and everything.
Nice. Brad, do you have a
Might be
favorite
here.
activity? Oh, it's already in the mug.
This is my second autumn in Hungary. So I don't have too many traditions or anything, but I will say to Corinne's point, I'm from originally upstate New York, and there we also have a big apple community. And one of my favorite things was getting apple cider donuts. I'm not sure if they do those in Ohio, Corinne, but those were, especially when you get them and they're warm right out of the fryer. Oh, it's just, you can't beat it.
Too hungry for this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just like watching horror movies. I love the spooky season, so just cuddling up and watching a good horror movie is my favorite fall activity, I think. But anyway, back to the regularly scheduled programming. And I see we have more viewers chiming in from the UK, Romania, shout out to Madalena, Canada, Brazil, and Belgium. So thank you all for joining. This is our 11th Veeam 100 show. If you're unfamiliar with the Veeam 100 show, this is a monthly show. It usually occurs the first Thursday of every month. And this is a chance for our Veeam 100. If you're unfamiliar with that program, these are our top technical evangelists from our Veeam community. Our legends, our vanguards, our MVPs, they're showcasing a project that they're passionate about sharing with our larger community. Oh, and we have somebody going back to the fall question, saying that they're celebrating with some pumpkin pie, which is great. This is a special episode, I say, because we're actually marking the 1-year anniversary. I don't know if either of you know, from our first Veeam 100 show. We actually started in October of last year. I just was like rewatching some of the ones from last year yesterday, and I noticed that October was our first show. So happy birthday to the Veeam 100 show. We had our first show last year on October 5th. That was with our Veeam Vanguard, Greg Barney. And since then, we have had 19 community members presenting on passion projects they're passionate about sharing with you all, our community. And today we have our 20th guest, Brad. He will showcase a project that he's been working on archiving legacy Veeam backups for Microsoft 365 in AWS. But before we discuss Brad's project, let's get an introduction of who Brad is, who Corinne is. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves? Brad, maybe you go first since this is your first time on the show.
Yeah, awesome. And it's great being here. I've been part of the Veeam, well, before it was actually known as the Veeam 100 community, but I've been part of the community for almost 10 years now. I've been a Vanguard for, I believe, 6 years. And honestly, it's just every software provider that's large has their own community, but there's just something about the Veeam community that just feels so inclusive and just feels, so respected. It brings me back to when I was younger in the earlier days of the internet before everything, sort of blew up and now everyone and their mother's on the internet. But it brings me back to, people are just helpful. People want to, help people use the software. And it's more of a, let's figure it out, let's hack it, let's make it work kind of environment than, some of the other communities and some of the other software providers. So of all the communities that I'm a part of, the Veeam 100 community is great. So I work for a company called ThinkOn. It's based out of Canada. However, we have, a presence in Europe and Australia as well. And I basically just work with the team to develop products using Veeam for the most part, and how we can work with the software, its features, its functionalities and capabilities to be able to enhance our own offerings. And provide good value for our customers.
Yes. Corinne?
Excellent. Well, Corinne Bissett. I am a technologist here at Veeam Software. I specialize in the Microsoft 365 platform, which I'm excited that we'll get to dig into today. I've been with Veeam for about 8 years. I've spent a lot of time on the evangelism side inside the Microsoft community, and I'm really excited to get into our presentation.
Oh, awesome. Before we start getting into the presentation, I did have one question for Brad, which you kind of touched on already, talking about your history within the community. But Brad, how did you get involved with Veeam's community, with technical communities in general, and what has been your favorite aspect of being in communities?
Great question. So I'll tell you a very quick story. The way I got involved with Veeam in general is I used to be a consultant, and I used Veeam for, my customers that I had. And one day I got a call from a old customer of mine in the middle of the night at, I want to say it was 10 p.m. And he said, "Hey, everything is down in my environment. I haven't spoken to you in 3 years, but can you hop on really quick and see if we can solve the problem?" And I said, "Sure." Yeah. He's like, "I'll pay you whatever you want." And I said, "Okay, you don't have to pay me. It's fine,
Hey.
So I hopped on, and luckily it was an easy problem to fix, and we solved everything in 5 minutes. That led to me getting a job at a previous Veeam service provider, and that's how I got involved with Veeam. And back then, the only part of the Veeam community was the forums. So I just got really involved in the forums and, used that as a good way to learn the platform and everything. And since then, the Vanguard program really started up, and I became a Vanguard, and I've just been a part of the current community forums and everything right now. So it's mostly just purely out of wanting to learn the software, learn the product, figure it out and do it in the best way possible. And as I've been working with Veeam over the past 10 or so years or whatever it is, then the community programs have really just shot up. So I've sort of just been organically integrated into them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you're also a bug leader. You actually had an event a few weeks ago as well. So all about education and connecting with others, the essential parts of community. But don't want to take too much time away from the project, which is what people are here tuning in So Brad, why don't we discuss your project? I know you have a few slides to share with us today.
Awesome. Sounds great. So this is a project that came from a customer of ThinkOn's who had originally run their own Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 environment, and they were backing up all of their individual users. This is a customer that's involved in legal things, so they have a pretty strict requirements. We'll go over that. But basically, they wanted to move from their platform to ours, and they were looking at ways of maintaining their legacy data in order, or if for whatever reason they need to recover it in the future, and being able to retain it in a cheaper way than just having it sit in object storage in AWS. So let's get into it. So first off, we'll talk about the problem statement. Every good project starts with a problem statement. Then we'll talk about the requirements, and then we'll just talk about the process of how we've chosen to solve this exact problem. Now, for this particular customer, they have this entire option needs to be done for all of their users. However, when talking through with them, you could also, in theory, use this to archive legacy user data that you also need to have maintained for compliance reasons, things like that. Awesome. So problem statement. All right. So first off, the customer was running Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 inside of AWS, and all of the backups were landing inside of S3 buckets. Now, the way that they had chosen to do this, because of how they manipulate their data, or I'm not sure exactly why they chose to do it this way, but each user has their own bucket inside of AWS. So each user has their own job. It lands into their own individual repository inside of S3. And basically, they're able to recover, move data around. I suppose there's some positive benefits to it. I don't know how they or why they architected it this way, but this is what we're left with. Now, The big thing is because of legal reasons, they are required to keep all data from all of their former employees for a period of 7 years. Now, this isn't just when the user leaves, they take a snapshot of the mailbox, of their OneDrive, of their SharePoint, whatever, and then, okay, you keep that for 7 years. No, it's during the entire time that the employee was there. They need to, the timer starts from day one, and they need to maintain all copies of that data for 7 years. So that includes all of the daily snapshots and everything from every single employee. So as a result of this, and by moving from their platform over to ThinkOn's platform, they don't want to keep their data inside of S3 as it can be a bit more prohibitively expensive than other options. So the whole point of this project was to be able to maintain that data sovereignty. Sovereignty is the wrong word, but maintain the copy of the data while moving it over into cheaper storage, so that way they don't have to pay the full price of it.
So Brad,
go ahead.
You had to inherit an existing configuration. So if you inherited this, is there anything that you kind of wish was done better to start with, or that you might have modified when you first started to try to meet this compliance?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting model having a bucket per user. It's quite complicated as far as having to set up every time you bring on a new user. You have to create a whole new bucket for them, move it over. I sort of understand like the concept of having it be sort of modular, but I would probably do it in a, a more usual way, in a sense that I don't necessarily see the requirements for doing that, and it just adds additional steps in order to onboard over, additional users and everything, and creates administrative overhead. So I probably would have done it where, we maybe reduce that down into a bucket per organization or organizational group inside of the organization, or maybe just have everything going to one bucket. There's not really too much benefit to having it go to all the individual buckets. But that being said, I know that there are some really cool things coming out in the next version of Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 that allows you to migrate data between repositories and things of that nature. So yes, I probably would have done some things differently, and had the organization not come to us and had an immediate urge to move, we probably could have done some cool things with the repository migrations that's coming out in the next version of VB for M365. But what are your thoughts on that, Corinne?
There's a lot of, I think, maybe not just legacy backups, but legacy configuration that might have played some roles here. We've definitely had some overhauls to the project as of late, especially, that kind of makes this a little bit more flexible on the scalability factor. And I'm wondering if maybe backup copy could be a option moving forward, and if you guys use any kind of immutability in this. Is it a requirement, or do they just need to attempt to keep that data?
So for them, I don't believe immutability is a requirement. Now, at ThinkOn, we do have the immutability option as a option that they can use. I would have to check on their current configuration as far as if they're using it or not. Obviously, it's a choice for customers. And backup copy could definitely work. Again, this is sort of an odd requirement because this customer, they don't need just a single snapshot of the data from, the last time that the user logged in or whatever. They need to have that full historical. So if a user maybe deleted an email on, October of 2015, and you still needed to go back and recover that, then we can go back to the data from September of 2015 to recover the data that the user may have deleted, not just like the snapshot of the mailbox. So backup copy could certainly help, but it's just a matter of, making sure that we have all of that data available, because again, they're under some pretty strict legal requirements and they could face some very serious penalties for not meeting them.
So basically, when the person leaves the company, you have to almost freeze their data in that specific period of time for an additional 7 years. That's a huge storage requirement on that side.
Correct. And that's exactly why we need to find a way to move it somewhere that is less expensive.
Well, show us how.
Awesome. Great. So first, we'll go over some of the requirements, and we already talked about this a little bit, but first off, the legacy user data has to remain intact and recoverable in a reasonable time frame. So what has been decided as a reasonable time frame is data that is under 30 days old. We need to be able to not recover the data fully, but we need to be able to initiate a restore for the data in 4 hours. Obviously, we can't guarantee that all data is going to be restored in 4 hours. They might have a terabyte, picture or something that's just taking up a bunch of space, and it's literally not possible to recover that in 4 hours. But we want to be able to initiate the recovery in under 4 hours, or 4 hours or under. Data that is over 30 days, up to 7 years, we want to be able to initiate that recovery time in 1 week. So pretty lenient guide rails. Again, a lot of this stuff is just, okay, if someone asks them for this data because of, I don't know, a lawsuit or something like that, they need to be able to retrieve that in a reasonable time frame. But it's not like something it needs to be recovered immediately for every single thing. So we thought that was, pretty reasonable. We could definitely work around that. And, we basically based our thought process on, a week to initiate a recovery time is perfectly fine. We could move some of this data into tape. There's a bunch of options we have available to us. But instead, we decided to go with another route. But the other item is that guardrails need to be put in place to ensure that once data is restored back, that it will then either go back into archive, or that the data that we copy from archive that doesn't ever leave archive, it will eventually be deleted. And this is just to ensure that we have proper cleanup processes in place and things of that nature. All right, so let's get into the actual process. This is the fun stuff. Basically, the whole core concept is that the legacy user data, after the customer has moved all of their users over to the new Office 365 backup platform, has to be remained in S3 for 30 days. And this is to meet that 4-hour time frame. There are some options within Glacier to do an expedited restore. We'll go into that in a little bit. But we want to make sure that there's nothing that's preventing us from restoring that data. So after 30 days, we will migrate the data from S3 into AWS Glacier, which is a much cheaper storage tier. And then once that happens, we'll no longer be able to recover that data within the Veeam console itself. So basically, the jobs will remain in the Veeam console. Everything will be there. Obviously, the jobs are disabled prior to migrating it in, but we won't be able to actually recover the data. If we try to do it, we'll get an error message because the data is not where Veeam is expecting it to be. So what we have to do is use the AWS API in order to move the data back. We'll get into those commands in a second here. And as I mentioned, as long as the organization and job remain inside of the Veeam console, we can move that data back to the same location that Veeam's expecting it to be, and Veeam will be able to recover that data. And, it can only be there, it would only have to be there temporarily while that data restoration process happens. All right, so moving the data from S3 into Glacier is very simple. You simply need to go to your AWS console, locate the buckets, and then locate whichever folder or bucket or whatever it is, edit the storage class, and just choose Glacier Flexible Retrieval Tier, which is just formerly known as Glacier. So this usually takes, from my testing, maybe about 30 minutes, sometimes longer, depending on if there's a bunch more data, but it looks to mostly just change the storage class in the back end versus actually moving the data. And I think a lot of the data migration actually happens sort of behind the scenes, so to speak. But it usually takes about 30 minutes for this to complete. Once that's done, the customer data is no longer in S3, it's inside of Glacier. And as a result, we are saving a bunch of money because, as I think you mentioned, Corinne, the customer does have a lot of data. There's a lot of data stored in, OneDrive, SharePoints, everything else. And a lot of that data, or all of that data gets archived as well. So we've noticed, I believe it's about a 30% reduction in costs, which for when you have to keep data for 7 years, it actually adds up to quite a bit. So
Brad, just out of curiosity, the
Mhm.
type of data that we're working with, how big would you say the data footprint is? Like, how much data are we seeing per user that has to be archived in these stands?
I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers, but it was quite large because a lot of it is all PDF documents. I don't really want to get into what exactly the customer does, but let's just say that a lot of users have a larger amount of data than you would normally think to have inside of Office 365, especially when they're using it as, their file server for, OneDrive and SharePoint. And also, they also get a large amount of emails coming in and a lot of the attachments and everything. So I don't remember the exact amount, but it was definitely larger than I've normally anticipated or I've normally come across for people's Microsoft 365 environments. But that being said, I feel like, especially as the internet gets better and Microsoft 365 continues to get better, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of people shying away from using usual file servers or anything and start storing stuff more on Microsoft 365. So I would expect the size of these environments to increase drastically. I just think that this particular organization might have been a little bit ahead of the curve, if that makes sense.
Perfect. And you have some information on how you actually did this process in the data retrieval, right?
Yes, we'll go into that. Awesome. Alrighty. So retrieving the data. So once the data's inside of Glacier, we've reduced the cost of storing it. Great, lovely. And again, especially for legal and compliance reasons, we really want to make sure that we know that that data is available, but we don't really care about getting it back immediately. This is just in case there ever needs to be someone reaching out for some compliance reason. Hey, this person supposedly sent this email on this date, or we need to get this data for this legal case or whatever it might be. None of that stuff needs to be done immediately. It's all just purely archiving. You can sort of think of it as cold storage. So unfortunately, as easy as it was to move the data from S3 into Glacier, it is not as easy to actually recover the data. And this is something that we had to spend some time to figure out. And I have some great teammates on ThinkOn's team who, spent a lot of time trying to perfect these commands and do testing and make sure that everything works out. But first thing that we wanted to do, and you might be able to do this from Windows as well, but in our case, we use a lot of Linux, but you need to install the AWS CLI. So you can see right there, it's very easy inside of a Linux box. Anyone that uses apt, you can also, there's a different command if you're using, a Red Hat flavored version or Debian or whatever, but you just need to install AWS CLI and then do AWS configure, and that's going to prompt you to connect up to whichever bucket it is that you're going to be connecting to on S3. Once we're done with that, we're inside of the bucket, and I have this long command here that is full of a bunch of things that I'm not going to go through and explain every single thing inside of the command. But I just put a little side note over here that says all the things that need to be changed. But basically, the command just lists everything that we have inside of the bucket and says that it wants it to, move it over into a Glacier environment. So the one really cool thing I wanted to point out that this command has is you can change if you look over on the right side, you can change the restore request days to the number of days the files will remain inside of standard object storage. So if you remember, one of the requirements that we had was to be able to put some guardrails around ensuring that, the data doesn't just end up staying there once we're done restoring it. We can actually adjust this to be able to say, hey, I only need to restore a few files keep it in here for 3 days max, and then it'll automatically get removed. So it's quite a nifty feature and a good way to be able to actually ensure that we're not just going to leave the data there. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I'm sure most people are of, you finish a project, you're like, okay, great, wrap it up. And then you forget to go back and just clean up the mess you made. But, and suddenly now you're getting charged for a bunch of things. But this is just a really good automated way to make sure that you do it. One thing is, though, when you do this, just make sure you don't make the day one when it's going to take you 2 days to restore, because otherwise it's going to get deleted and you'll have to go back and start from scratch. The other thing is just the tier is expedited or standard. If you wanted to, expedited files will be moved over in 5 minutes, and standard will take about 3 hours. Obviously, expedited is more expensive. I have not tested this fully, but supposedly the file size does not matter, according to AWS's documentation. That's their words, not mine. I don't know how that necessarily makes sense, frankly, but from my testing, it seems to. So I haven't dug too deep into it, but according to my customers' requirements, 5 minutes versus 3 hours is not really the biggest deal, because again, this is just going to be something that we're going to be pulling data from, and we won't need it for, at least a day. So 5 minutes versus 3 hours doesn't really make too much of a difference. And the amount of data that we've tested, we haven't really seen any problems recovering it. And obviously, whatever bucket is, you just add in the bucket name and it'll choose that. All right. So once that's done, the data has been moved over, and again, 5 minutes or 3 hours, depending on which class you chose. Basically, we just need to copy the data back into where it's supposed to be, and we have this data here. I'm sorry, this command here, and it just moves the data back into the original location. Obviously, we want to put it back into the original bucket that it came from. So that way, when Veeam looks at the repository, it just sees all the data as far as where it used to be. And as far as Veeam's concerned, nothing's changed, nothing's happened. The data is still there. It's just the fact that the job's been disabled. And then from there, you're able to open up the Veeam console, browse to it, and or browse the job rather, and then select whatever data it is that you need to recover from any of the restore points that happen to be in there. So it's a rather simple process, but it's something that took us a little bit of testing to figure out. It would have been nice if there was just an easy way to do it within the AWS console and not have to write up a bunch of commands and do a bunch of testing from that. But as far as the customer is concerned, they're quite happy with it. Like I mentioned, having that data stored in Glacier is a bunch cheaper than having it stored in regular S3 storage. So we're saving them money, and now they're using our platform. So to your point before, Corinne, they're using it in a proper way now. And it's probably one of the reasons why they decided to move over to us, is because they found it such a headache to manage on their side, just because of the way it was architected originally.
That's a really interesting use case. It really does meet the compliance needs with both technologies together, between the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 initial backup and archiving of that data, to then using the native AWS features in conjunction, created a really succinct, you wouldn't at first think of this, but a succinct solution to a very interesting compliance issue. And Sophia, do you have some wrapping up for us?
Yeah, I mean, Brad, obviously this is a community show. So is there anywhere that the community can go to find out more about this project? Is there a blog written somewhere, anything like that?
It's something that we only did about a month ago, and
Okay.
I was originally had another idea to use for this Veeam 100 show that we actually do have some information about, and you'll see it posted in ThinkOn's social media. You can follow me as well on LinkedIn or X, and I'll be sharing it as well. But this is something that was sort of just a customer project, and when the idea that we had initially had didn't pan out because of unfortunately, the feature that we were going to use, like I mentioned, had been delayed a little bit inside of VB 365. So this was just something that we pivoted to because it was another cool project that we were working on. So I don't have anything specifically written up. This was more of an individual customer use case, but I will likely write something up on this and make a nice blog post about it using some of the documentation and go into a little bit more of the details. Obviously, we only have 30 minutes today, so there's some other items that I didn't really dive too far into, but we'll try and cover that a little bit more in a blog and post that on the community site.
Yeah, so stay tuned with Brad and his projects. Maybe an excuse to have you come back and do that presentation on the one that didn't end up panning out. But
sounds good to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience. Last chance to get them in, but I do want to thank you again, Brad, for joining us on this show today. I want to thank you, Corinne, for co-moderating with me, production with Felicia and Jeff. And for everyone who tuned in today, we will be back to regularly scheduled programming, the Tech Bites, every Thursday. And the first week of November, we will be back with a Veeam 100 show with another community project. Till then, keep up with the community on the Community Resource Hub, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.